Something felt off that morning in Northwood. A strange kind of silence, heavy, deliberate, almost calculated, swept across the entire cafeteria the moment the new kid sat down to eat. Two worlds were about to collide, and no one there had the slightest idea that the skinny newcomer was the most dangerous person in the room. Stay with me until the end, because what happened after this moment was so intense, so unexpected, that even Northwood's most seasoned inmates froze where they stood, guards included. Men who had seen everything suddenly forgot how to breathe. Before we move on, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. That helps this video reach more people. Alright, let's continue. Because what comes next is even heavier. Northwood Penitentiary had its own way of revealing secrets. Some spread like rumors along the halls, others stayed buried, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for that delicate intersection of silence and chaos. And in that cold cafeteria, with steel tables lined in perfect symmetry and tall windows letting in a thin, pale light, the balance of the entire prison was about to shift. And it all started with a rookie sitting in front of a plain tray of food. He looked out of place. Small, thin, features too young for an environment this hostile. He ate in silence, controlled almost delicate movements, ignoring the murmurs around him. The name on his uniform tag simply read HA12, and that was all anyone knew about him. Nothing more. A complete unknown. Across the room, walking with long, deliberate strides, came Rogan, the most feared bully in Northwood. A mountain of muscle, wide shoulders, a thick neck, tattoos twisting across his arms like scars from old wars. He didn't have to speak loudly. His presence spoke for him. Wherever he walked, conversations died, eyes dropped, even the clatter of trays seemed to soften. Behind him, lined up like silent soldiers, came his crew. Big men, seasoned men, men who understood how to command fear and respect. They weren't there to eat, they came to watch. And everyone knew exactly why. The rookie had sat in a seat no one touched without Rogan's permission. It was like sitting on a king's throne without being invited. No one did that. No one dared. No one until that kid. The giant stopped right in front of him. The shadow he cast over the rookie swallowed half the table. But HA12 kept eating, calmly, without looking up, without speeding up, without showing a trace of fear. That calm annoyed Rogan instantly. "Hey!" he growled, his voice so deep the table vibrated. "You always ignore people, or just the one who runs this place." The rookie took one last bite. Then he wiped his lips with the tip of his fingers. Only then did he lift his gaze. A small movement. Simple, but something in it deeply unsettled the bully. In the kid's eyes, there was no arrogance, no fear, not even surprise. There was control, complete control. Rogan read that as defiance. "You're sitting in my seat," the giant said, leaning closer until their faces were inches apart. "And when I show up, you stand up. That's how things work here." His crew snickered behind him, expecting the rookie to tremble, apologize, jump to his feet. That was how it always went. Predictable. The natural cycle inside Northwood's walls. But the kid didn't react. He took a slow breath, like someone savoring a moment of quiet. Then he placed his chopsticks gently on the tray, and held that steady, unblinking, calculating stare. Nearby guards noticed the tension and took a few steps closer, alert but not intervening. They knew Rogan, knew he loved pushing boundaries, knew that morning carried the scent of trouble. The cafeteria grew so quiet you could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Then Rogan slammed his palm on the table, sending the tray sliding a few inches. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, rookie." This time, HA12 tilted his chin the slightest bit, studying the giant from head to toe like a teacher evaluating a misbehaving student. And for the first time that day, somebody noticed something no one else had. The rookie's posture was too perfect to be accidental. Straight spine, light breathing, feet planted firmly, hands resting in a way that suggested they could move in any direction at any second. That was the posture of someone trained. Trained for real. Trained to assess distances, leverage, weak points, attack vectors. But Rogan didn't see that. Rogan saw only a skinny kid in the wrong seat. The bully reached for the bread on the tray and yanked it out of the rookie's hand, a way of showing who owned the territory. That's when something shifted. Not in the kid's face, not in his posture, but in the air around him. A new silence, sharp, blade-like, cut across the room. Veteran inmates exchanged looks. Guards stepped even closer. Rogan's men stopped smiling. J-12 lifted his face again, and this time his gaze was different. It wasn't calm anymore. It was deep, sharp, technical. The gaze of someone who mastered Kung Fu at a level where every muscle knows what to do before the mind even forms the thought. And in that single instant, a truth became painfully clear to anyone perceptive enough to see it. Rogan wasn't provoking a rookie. He was provoking a master. No one knew that. Not yet. Northwood Penitentiary wasn't just a building wrapped in high concrete walls. It was its own universe, governed by invisible codes and silent dynamics that only those who lived inside its confines could ever truly understand. Each block had its own rules, each group had its own leaders, and every corner held stories that never made it into any official report. And behind the metallic slam of steel doors and the constant echo of guards' boots, there was a tension that never fully faded, an ever-present reminder to every inmate that survival wasn't guaranteed. It was earned, every single day. Rogan was a central piece of that brutal ecosystem. Before Northwood, he'd been a nightclub bouncer, an amateur fighter, and for a while, a feared presence on the streets. He wasn't just strong, he was addicted to control. He needed everything and everyone to orbit around him, follow his orders, acknowledge his strength. Inside the prison, that obsession found fertile ground. In just a few months, he built his own hierarchy, and no one dared step across his path. His followers, 6 men who walked behind him like a single collective shadow, weren't exactly loyal. They were dependent on Rogan's strength, his influence, his ability to keep problems at bay, and to create new ones whenever needed. They knew that as long as they kept the giant pleased, they were relatively safe. Rogan, in turn, used this squad to reinforce his image of invincibility. But HA-12, the newcomer, seemed to exist in a completely different world. To some inmates, he looked shy. To others, he looked oddly detached from the environment. But what no one realized, not on that first day at least, was that his silence wasn't born from inexperience. It was the kind of calm that comes from discipline. His flawless posture, his steady breathing, his small, deliberate movements, all of it formed a mosaic that only a very attentive eye could decipher. Few knew that before Northwood, HA-12, whose real name still hadn't circulated among the inmates, had trained under one of the most respected masters of traditional Kung Fu. He'd practiced since childhood, far from the lights of modern gyms, following ancient techniques that prized self-control, perception, and perfect precision. He wasn't a regular fighter. He was the product of years of silent discipline, shaped to react only when absolutely necessary. But there, sitting alone in the cafeteria, no one had any idea. To everyone, he was just the skinny new kid who didn't know where he'd landed. And that included Rogan. Northwood was a place where truths took time to surface. Inmates watched, tested, whispered rumors before forming opinions. But that day, the way the rookie ignored the prison's most feared bully was enough to stir quiet murmurs. There was something strange about him, something that didn't match his fragile appearance. The guards noticed him too. They were trained to catch signals, shifts in the environment, unusual movements, behavior that didn't fit the pattern, and HA-12's behavior was exactly that, out of pattern. A man who showed no fear in Northwood drew as much attention as one who showed too much. Rogan, however, wasn't a man of subtlety. He read silence as weakness, calm as provocation, and steady posture as defiance. It was the perfect recipe for disaster. What no one knew yet was how far this quiet storm was about to spread. What started as a disruption in the cafeteria was about to spill into the corridors, the blocks, and eventually the entire structure of the prison. Northwood was once again preparing to reveal its most dangerous side, the side that emerges when brute force collides with real technique. And this time, the collision would be unavoidable. The cafeteria slowly began to breathe again, but no one relaxed. After that tense moment when Rogan slammed the table and the rookie answered only with a sharp, precise stare, a different kind of energy settled over the room. It wasn't the usual fear Rogan inspired. It was something more complex, something even the veterans couldn't quite define. Rogan, however, had no doubts. This was a challenge, and he didn't tolerate challenges. He stepped back, not out of fear, but to get a better look at the newcomer, the way a predator studies its prey before the final strike. His followers began to spread out, creating an invisible circle around the scene. Every pair of inmate eyes locked onto the table where HA-12 still sat, seemingly oblivious to the chaos building around him. "So that's how it is?" Rogan said, crossing his arms. "You think you can just ignore the man who runs this place?" HA-12 didn't answer. He just breathed, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for those nearby to notice. It wasn't the breath of someone nervous. It was light, rhythmic, rehearsed. Anyone who understood martial arts would have recognized it instantly, the controlled breathing of someone highly trained. But no one there knew that. Rogan's crew jumped in, trying to stoke the fire. "The rookie thinks he's better than you, boss. He's disrespecting you in front of everybody. That's practically begging for a correction." Each comment was gasoline on an open flame. Rogan narrowed his eyes, but something about the kid bothered him deeply. The rookie didn't look annoyed, intimidated, or even fully aware of the provocation. It was like he existed in another world, listening to sounds from far away. Then, unexpectedly, HA-12 spoke. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice calm, steady, not raised even a little. "I'm just eating." The simplicity of the statement cut right through the heavy atmosphere, and it infuriated Rogan even more. An apology or a hint of fear he could accept, but neutrality made his authority feel irrelevant. "You're eating," Rogan repeated, leaning over the table, "in my seat." Veteran inmates waited for HA-12 to finally stand. Instead, he slowly turned his head, scanning the room, as if he were measuring the distance between the tables, the exits, the guard positions. Small, calculated assessments no one else noticed. No one except one of the oldest inmates, a quiet man named Burns, who watched everything with unusual focus. Burns had seen countless conflicts inside Northwood, but he had never seen someone analyze the environment like this, not like a victim, but like a strategist. Rogan's patience snapped. He grabbed HA-12's tray and hurled it to the floor, food splattering across the cold tiles. The sound echoed through the cafeteria, a loud, slicing crack that marked the beginning of something everyone knew wouldn't end here. The guards took another step forward, ready to intervene, yet frozen by the tension. HA-12 didn't react with anger. He simply looked back at Rogan and said, "You didn't need to do that." That simple sentence silenced the entire room. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a provocation. It was an observation. And that shook Rogan in a way he couldn't explain. He had no defense against someone who refused to play by his rules. The conflict was far from over. This was just the first brick falling before the whole wall came down. While Rogan was still trying to understand why the rookie wasn't reacting the way he expected, other forces inside Northwood had already begun to shift in silence. The prison was far more than a physical space. It was a constant chessboard where every inmate watched, analyzed, and waited for opportunities or threats. And what had just happened in the cafeteria was, for many, the beginning of something bigger. In cell block C, a few seasoned inmates whispered about the newcomer, not because of his size, but because of the way he behaved. One of them, a man known as Gibbons, had eyes as sharp as a hunter's. He prided himself on spotting weakness in seconds, and that day he didn't see weakness, he saw control. "That kid isn't normal," he murmured to the group. "Did you see his posture, the way he breathed? He didn't freeze, didn't flinch, didn't apologize. There's something going on there." The others laughed, brushing off his observation. But Gibbons wasn't joking. He had seen that kind of calm before, in trained men, soldiers, professional fighters. People who knew exactly what to do when violence crept too close. And that bothered him deeply because it meant one thing, a variable Rogan hadn't calculated for, and neither had he. In Block D, an entirely different crowd discussed the same event, but from another angle. They didn't care about the rookie's technique. They cared about the impact on the prison's internal order. Rogan was an important component of Northwood's fragile equilibrium. He intimidated who needed intimidating and kept other groups in check. If someone could challenge him, even unintentionally, it meant that balance could collapse. An inmate named Zeke, always quick to notice shifts in power, saw opportunity. "If this kid knocks Rogan off his pedestal, we get room to move. You guys understand what that means?" He wasn't talking about violence. He was talking about power, about leadership. But on the other end of that spectrum, another movement was quietly unfolding. Burns, the same veteran who'd watched HA-12 in the cafeteria, walked alone through the narrow hallways of the prison. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if he were piecing together an invisible puzzle. He'd seen countless newcomers walk in and make fatal mistakes on their first day. But that kid was different. To Burns, the question wasn't whether Rogan was underestimating the rookie. It was why. Burns believed every man carried a story in his eyes. Rogan's story was obvious: a hard life, brute strength, respect built on fear. But HA-12's? That was a mystery. There was no fear, no anxiety, but there was something few men could hide: purpose. The rookie didn't feel like someone thrown into this world by accident. He felt like someone carrying something within him, something he was fighting to keep dormant. And then there was another subplot in motion: the guards. Silent or not, they missed nothing. Two of them, Harris and Cole, spoke quietly after the cafeteria incident. "That kid didn't react even when Rogan tossed his tray," Harris said. "That's strange." "Strange in a dangerous way?" Cole asked. Harris took a moment. "Strange in a trained way." Cole let out a humorless snort. "Perfect. Just what we needed around here." Northwood's administration had one iron rule: maintain order above all else. And men like Rogan, despite the headaches, helped preserve that quiet order. But if another strong element emerged, someone capable of destabilizing him, that meant work. That meant surveillance. That meant risk. The rookie had become a point of interest for everyone. To Rogan, an insult. To some inmates, a threat. To others, an opportunity. To Burns, an enigma. To the guards, a potential problem. But to HA-12, none of that mattered. He was there for a reason still unrevealed. And what was coming next would prove that ignoring his true nature wouldn't be possible for much longer. The cafeteria incident could have ended right there, with Rogan knocking the tray to the floor and the rookie staying calm. But Northwood wasn't a place where tension simply faded on its own. In truth, that moment had only been the first spark. The real fire started hours later, when everyone returned to their blocks and the story spread like a silent virus through the halls. The entire prison whispered about the same detail: the rookie's eyes. Not arrogant, not defiant, just far too deep for someone who should have been shaking. And that small observation began to bother Rogan more than he cared to admit. When he returned to his cell in Block A, the giant paced back and forth, grinding his teeth, trying to understand why that skinny kid had gotten under his skin. He'd faced dangerous men before, insolent, aggressive, unpredictable. But no one had ever made him feel dismissed, as if his presence wasn't anything special. "Boss, what are we doing about him?" asked one of his men, Pike. Rogan stopped walking. "Do?" He let out a laugh no one liked hearing. "That rookie needs to learn where he is and who runs this place." Pike nodded, but hesitation lingered in his voice. "Boss, there's something off about that kid. He doesn't seem ordinary." Rogan turned his head slowly, as if Pike had just spoken complete nonsense. "He's a rookie, that's all. A rookie who doesn't understand that respect is the only way to survive here." But Pike wasn't convinced, and across the prison, neither was Burns. Burns had seen Rogan stomp down the corridor with fury in his eyes, and he knew instantly the conflict wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. And it was at that exact moment, beneath the weight of mounting tension, that everything started to shift. Later that afternoon, the inmates were released for yard time. The central yard was a walled-in slab of concrete surrounded by guard towers. It was one of the few moments of freedom in Northwood, but also one of the most dangerous, because it was where many settled their differences away from the cafeteria crowds and the internal cameras. HA-12 walked to an isolated corner and began doing something unusual. Stretching. He moved his arms in slow arcs, lengthened his spine, breathed deeply. Nothing flashy, nothing exaggerated. But every movement flowed with almost ritualistic precision, organic, fluid, as if every joint in his body followed a hidden blueprint. Burns watched from a distance. "So, I was right," he murmured. He had seen movements like that before, years ago, when he shared a cell with a former martial artist. Conscious movements, quiet movements, controlled movements. This wasn't a man unprepared. It was a man holding something inside, but Rogan didn't see any of that when he walked into the yard. He saw one thing, an opportunity. The bully marched forward with his crew, pushing through the crowd like a charging bull. The guards on the towers noticed the shift in atmosphere and kept their eyes sharp, but didn't intervene. Not yet. "Hey, rookie!" Rogan called out, his voice echoing through the yard. "We didn't finish our conversation in the cafeteria." J-12 paused his stretching and turned slowly. He didn't look concerned. He didn't look ready to fight. He looked neutral, as if he were politely waiting for Rogan to get whatever he needed to say out of his system. "I'm not here to start a fight," he replied calmly. "But you did," Rogan snapped back. "And now you're going to look me in the eyes and tell me what you think you are." Silence. Inmates drifted closer, forming a loose semicircle. No one wanted to miss this. Moments like these became legend inside a place like Northwood. "Well?" Rogan pressed. "Who do you think you are?" J-12 took a deep breath and answered with, "Someone you shouldn't provoke." It was the first time he'd said anything that resembled a warning, not threatening, not aggressive, just spoken with such absolute serenity that it sent chills through those who heard it. Rogan let out a short, tense laugh, but before he could take even a single step toward violence, something unexpected happened. J-12 shifted his feet, just slightly, just enough. A movement so small, so subtle, but one Burns recognized instantly. And that's when Burns understood the gravity of the moment. The rookie wasn't just standing, he was entering a stance, not a casual fighting posture. A stance of someone trained at the highest level. The turning point had arrived. From that moment forward, any move Rogan made would be answered, and nobody was prepared for what was coming next. When HA-12 shifted his feet, lowering his center of gravity and relaxing his shoulders with almost artistic precision, anyone who understood combat saw it instantly. That wasn't fear. It wasn't hesitation. It was preparation. a silent, dangerous, calculated readiness. But Rogan saw none of it. He was blinded by his own fury, his need to assert dominance, his absolute conviction that no skinny, quiet newcomer could possibly threaten him. He stepped forward, chest puffed out, ready to shove the rookie into the concrete wall of the yard. That's when Burns, watching from across the yard, widened his eyes. "Rogan, don't do this," he whispered, far too softly for anyone to hear. But it was already too late. Rogan's men, energized by the promise of a public humiliation, closed in, forming a human wall around the scene. Inmates nearby started whistling, calling others over, pointing, whispering. This was the kind of moment that fueled legends. No one wanted to miss it. No one wanted to lose the right to say, "I was there." The atmosphere shifted completely when Rogan took that final step. The step you don't come back from. J12 didn't retreat, didn't flinch, didn't look away. He stood perfectly still, breathing softly, studying every movement of the giant with clinical precision. It was as if he could predict every muscle Rogan engaged, every shift of weight, every intention telegraphed through his body. It wasn't reckless courage. It was technical reading. When Rogan raised his arm to shove him, HA12 made his first deliberate move. He lifted his hand. Just that. An open hand, calmly raised. But inside that gesture were three things no one expected: serenity, control, and technique. Rogan stopped instinctively, not out of fear, but out of confusion. "What do you think you're doing, rookie?" he growled. H12 replied with a single sentence, "Preventing you from getting hurt." The words fell over the yard like a silent thunderclap. Inmates glanced at each other, unsure whether to laugh, back away, or stay frozen where they stood. Guards in the towers shifted uneasily, ready to intervene if needed. But what truly changed the mood was Rogan's expression. He didn't laugh. He froze. Not from physical fear, but from something far more dangerous. Doubt. Doubt about who he was really facing. And that doubt enraged him even more. "Hurt me?" Rogan roared, his voice shaking the air. "Kid, I'm gonna teach you never to challenge me again." And then Rogan charged. Fast, direct, brutal, but also predictable. For someone trained at HA12's level, every motion had openings, every force shift left a trail, every intention was obvious. The rookie stepped sideways, just a tiny, precise adjustment, and Rogan barreled past him like an off-course bull. The inmates gasped. No one expected that. No one had ever seen Rogan miss like that. The giant spun around, furious and ready to strike again, but something in HA12's eyes made him hesitate. It wasn't arrogance. It was patience. The kind of patience possessed only by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Pike, one of Rogan's men, whispered, "Boss, maybe we should—" Rogan cut him off with a roar. "Shut your mouth!" But the damage was done. Even his own followers were realizing something was wrong. Very wrong. The entire yard shifted. Moments before, everyone expected to see the rookie crushed. Now the opposite was happening. Rogan was being exposed. Not physically, but psychologically. Every swing, every attempt, every movement was being read, avoided, neutralized, without visible effort. And that shattered his image faster than any punch ever could. Burns stepped forward, unable to stay silent. "Rogan, stop. You have no idea who you're dealing with." But the giant ignored him. Because at that point, it wasn't about a cafeteria seat or prison respect anymore. It was about pride, and pride is what destroys men like Rogan. HA12 didn't strike, didn't taunt, didn't advance. He stayed in position, waiting. Because he already knew the most important truth. The fight had already begun, and Rogan was no longer the one in control. That brief exchange in the yard, so quiet and yet so overwhelming, had changed everything. For the first time since arriving at Northwood, HA12 realized it would be impossible to avoid conflict forever. He had tried to stay invisible, hide his technique, preserve his own peace. But Northwood wasn't a place that allowed silence for long. And now, confronted by Rogan and watched by the entire prison, he understood that his greatest test was only beginning. The rookie took a deep breath, feeling the dry yard air fill his lungs. He wasn't afraid. Fear was for unpredictable situations, and this one, dangerous as it seemed, was completely within his capacity. What bothered him wasn't the threat, but something deeper. When the world tries to push you into a fight you don't want, the strength you need isn't the strength to win, but the strength to remain who you are. As Rogan charged with his usual brutality, HA-12 didn't respond with aggression. Every movement he made was minimal, precise, calculated. A sidestep, a slip, a subtle rotation of the hips. It wasn't a fight. It was control. Control of his body. Control of the space. Control of the energy around him. And slowly, that control began shifting the inmates' perspective. They expected the rookie to fight wildly, desperately, just to stay alive. But that wasn't what they saw. They saw someone so centered, so calm, that the atmosphere of the yard began to reorganize around him. That moment, quiet but powerful, was the beginning of his breakthrough. HA-12 wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. He was there to survive. And survival for him wasn't brutality. It was technique. It was discipline. It was everything he had learned since childhood. True strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about mastering yourself. Rogan, meanwhile, was facing something he had never felt before: loss of control. The harder he tried to assert dominance, the clearer it became that he wasn't dictating the rhythm of the fight. It was like trying to grab water. The more force he used, the faster it slipped through his fingers. The prison reacted to that contrast. The group of inmates who always backed Rogan now exchanged uncertain looks. They were used to following the strongest man, but who was the strongest now? The giant who flailed without technique, or the thin newcomer who moved like he could see the future? Burns watched from a distance, an almost respectful expression forming on his face. He's holding back, Burns thought. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. But he could, if he wanted to. And that was what made HA-12 unlike anyone else in Northwood. While Rogan tried to create fear, the rookie tried to avoid harm. His strength didn't come from aggression. It came from emotional control, a rare thing in a place where men were pushed toward violence every single day. And that attitude sparked something unheard of inside Northwood: silent respect. Inmates watched Rogan shout, lunge, miss, lose his breath, and they watched HA-12 remain steady, balanced, unshaken. The breakthrough wasn't in physical dominance. It was in the revelation of truth. He wasn't what he appeared to be. When Rogan stumbled after another failed charge, HA-12 stepped back, maintaining his stance, refusing to strike. "I don't need to fight you," the rookie said softly. "I just want peace." Those words, so simple, so unexpected, echoed through the yard like a deep whisper. No one in Northwood looked for peace. No one believed peace was even possible. But in that moment, hearing those words, several inmates felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. HA-12 was evolving, not as a fighter, he already was one, but as someone capable of changing the entire environment around him. And it was in that moment that Rogan finally realized the real fight had never been physical. After that moment in the yard, when HA-12 slipped out of Rogan's path without even raising a hand to strike, Northwood fell into a state of silent alert. It was as if the walls themselves had heard everything, as if the prison was holding its breath, waiting for the next step in a story that was now more than just a clash between two men. It was a looming shift in hierarchy. The inmates returned to their blocks with restless eyes. HA-12's behavior had shaken Northwood's invisible structure, the one that said brute strength was the only law that mattered. And now, For the first time in years, there was someone breaking that rule without shouting, without threatening, without throwing a punch, just by existing in calm. The ripple effect spread quickly. In Block C, a few inmates whispered in low voices, "You see that? Rogan almost fell on his own." The new kid didn't even touch him. He dodged like he knew exactly where the hit was coming from. To some, HA-12 was becoming a fascinating mystery. To others, a potential threat. To everyone, a different kind of force, a kind they didn't quite know how to label. Meanwhile, Rogan locked himself away in his cell, sinking into a silent rage that made even his followers uneasy. He had always seen himself as invincible, the absolute top of Northwood's food chain, and now he'd been exposed, not beaten down physically, but humiliated mentally. Worse yet, the rookie hadn't done anything remotely aggressive. For someone like Rogan, that was the worst kind of defeat. "Boss, maybe we should just let this go," Pike suggested carefully. Rogan turned his head slowly, his eyes a mix of shame and anger. "Let it go?" he repeated, almost in a whisper. "He made me look weak, in front of everyone." Pike hesitated. "But he didn't hit you." "Exactly," Rogan roared, slamming his hand against the cell wall. "He ignored me, treated me like I was nothing. That's worse than any punch." And in that moment, a dangerous decision began to take shape in his mind. On the other side of the prison, HA-12 sat on his bunk, eyes closed, breathing slowly. He knew the yard incident had changed everything. He also knew that simply avoiding conflict wouldn't be enough anymore. Even so, he clung to his core. Avoid violence whenever possible. But prison doesn't work like the outside world. Baker, one of the most experienced inmates, stepped up to the bars of the rookie's cell. "You need to understand something, kid," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "And what happened out there isn't over. Rogan's not going to let that slide. No leader would." HA-12 opened his eyes. "I don't want to fight him," he said simply. Baker let out a bitter laugh. "In Northwood, it doesn't matter what you want. It matters what people think you're capable of, and now everybody's seen you're not normal." HA-12 stayed quiet, thinking. Baker went on, "There's going to come a time when Rogan tries to settle this for real. He's going to call for a fix. Something the guards pretend not to see. Something inevitable." That word echoed in the air. Inevitable. But there was something Baker didn't know. KA-12 had faced inevitables before. He'd gone up against men bigger, meaner, more unpredictable. And he'd survived, not because he was stronger, but because he was faster, more technical, more aware. As Baker spoke, the rookie ran through everything in his mind. The yard's dimensions, the blind spots in the towers, movement routes, Rogan's physical limitations, the intensity of his followers, the guards' reactions. He wasn't planning a fight. He was planning how to prevent the worst. But sometimes, even when you try to stop it, fate carves its own path. Two guards walking down the corridor traded a few low words. "Block A guys want to set this up for tomorrow." "Yeah, it's going to be hard to stop." HA-12 heard every syllable, and he understood. The climax had been scheduled, not officially, not announced, but set in the air, in the tension, in Northwood's warped logic. The fight he didn't want was coming to him, and there was no backing out now. The sun hadn't even reached the center of the yard when the inmates began gathering, one by one, as if responding to a silent call. In Northwood, moments like this didn't need an announcement, a signal, or confirmation. The atmosphere delivered the message. The prison itself whispered it. And on that morning, everyone knew this would be the showdown between Rogan and the rookie. The guards in the towers positioned themselves without rush, but with alert eyes. They'd seen similar situations before, and while they couldn't openly allow a fight, they also knew that stepping in too early could make things worse. Northwood had its own set of rules, some written, others tolerated. HA-12 entered the yard, escorted by silence. His steps were light but steady. No tension in his expression, no fear, just a tranquil presence, almost meditative, that contrasted violently with the brutality of the place. He surveyed the yard, not out of nerves, but out of habit. Every entrance, every corner, every shadow, everything belonged to his conscious reading of the space. Then Rogan stepped in, a giant walking with the certainty that he was about to reclaim his honor. His jaw clenched, his face set, his fists tightened like blocks of concrete. His followers formed a wall behind him, but something in Rogan's eyes had changed since the day before. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was fear. Not fear of the rookie himself, fear of what the rookie represented. Loss of control, loss of dominance, loss of the identity he'd built for years. When the two finally stood face to face, the entire yard fell silent. Even the birds seemed to disappear. Rogan stepped forward. "Today we finish this," he declared. HA-12 took a slow breath. "I don't want to fight." "Oh, you'll fight," Rogan growled, "because I'm putting you back in your place." Silence. And then Rogan charged. Not with caution, not with technique, but with every ounce of brute force his body could muster. He threw a straight punch, fast for a man his size, a blow that would have dropped any ordinary man instantly. But HA-12 was not an ordinary man. He shifted his weight gently onto his heel, tilted his torso with surgical precision, and let the punch slice through empty air, brushing nothing but his shadow. The inmates around the yard held their breath. Rogan attacked again, and again, and again. Every hit, every lunge, every attempt was avoided by smooth, short, trained movements. HA-12 seemed to flow between the strikes, moving like someone who already knew every attack before it happened. It was pure kung fu, traditional kung fu. Kung fu alive. Rogan's followers exchanged nervous looks. What is that? How is he doing that? He's too fast. Rogan, now panting, started losing rhythm. He couldn't understand how a skinny kid could neutralize his strength without even laying a hand on him. And then it happened, the moment that would rewrite Northwood's history. Rogan lifted his arm for another wild strike. For the first time, HA-12 moved forward. With a short, precise, flawless gesture, he caught the giant's wrist, rotated his hips, and redirected Rogan's force back into him. The bully lost his balance, not because of HA-12's strength, but because of his own misdirected power. Rogan fell to his knees. The yard erupted. Guards leaned over the rails. Inmates froze in disbelief. Rogan's followers stepped back in shock. HA-12, however, did not attack. He simply placed a hand on the giant's shoulder and said in a calm, steady voice, "This ends when you decide to stop." The phrase hit the yard like silent thunder. Rogan, kneeling, struggled to breathe. The entire prison watched. His authority, his image, his strength, everything lay there on the ground. And for the first time he understood. He had provoked the wrong man, the quiet man, the thin man, the calm man, the man who was, without anyone knowing it, a master of kung fu. The silence that settled over the yard after Rogan fell wasn't like anything Northwood had ever experienced. It wasn't the silence of fear or of anticipation. It was the silence of truth being revealed. A truth no one was prepared to witness. HA-12, the quiet, skinny, seemingly fragile newcomer, had not only dodged every one of Rogan's blows, had not only forced the giant to his knees. He had done something far more powerful. He had proved that real strength doesn't come from size, but from mastery over oneself. Rogan remained on his knees for several long, unbearable seconds. His heavy breathing echoed off the concrete walls. His fists, usually clenched with confidence, now trembled, not from pain, but from recognition. Recognition that he had underestimated someone he should never have underestimated. HA-12 stepped back, posture solid, without a trace of arrogance. He didn't raise his arms in victory, didn't smirk, didn't taunt. He simply looked at Rogan with the same calm he'd carried from the beginning. "It's over," the rookie said softly. That was all. And that simple phrase carried more authority than any strike ever could. Rogan lifted his head. His followers, scattered around the yard, looked lost. None of them had ever seen their leader in this position. Some stepped back, others turned away. Rogan's image as Northwood's untouchable alpha had cracked, and everyone felt it. Burns, watching from a distance, allowed himself a small smile, not mocking, but respectful. He had sensed from the very start that HA-12 wasn't ordinary. Now the entire prison understood it too. Up in the towers, the guards exchanged glances. It was rare to see a conflict end without injuries, without chaos, without violence. Yet here they were, witnessing living proof that technique, control, and self-awareness could be far stronger than brute force. Rogan tried to stand, but his legs failed him again. And unexpectedly, HA-12 reached out a hand. The giant hesitated. No one in prison would dare offer Rogan help. No one, except the man who had just put him down. After a few seconds, Rogan accepted. HA-12 lifted him with surprising ease, and for a moment, the entire yard seemed frozen, watching something impossible. In a place fueled by brutality, they were witnessing respect. Rogan said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. He understood, and in some way, he was grateful. HA-12 then turned and walked toward the inner gate as if nothing extraordinary had happened, and maybe to him nothing had. To someone who had mastered an art like Kung Fu, victory isn't the goal. It's a byproduct of staying true to who you are. Behind him, all of Northwood remained frozen. The bully had fallen. The hierarchy had shifted, and the rookie, once invisible, now stood as the man everyone respected, even if no one fully understood him. But one truth was clear to all. The most dangerous man in the prison was never the biggest, the strongest, or the most violent. He was the calmest, the most technical, the quietest, and that morning proved it forever. After that day, Northwood was never the same again. Rogan, once feared by everyone, became quieter, not out of shame but out of respect for what he had witnessed. Inmates spoke of the rookie like one speaks of a legend, the man who defeated a giant without violence, only with technique and serenity. HA-12 returned to his discreet routine, sitting alone, breathing deeply, as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew. If peace reigned in the yard, it was because the most dangerous man there was also the one who least desired to fight. And that made him even more unpredictable. If this story kept you hooked until now, imagine what's still coming. Stories of resilience, intelligence, technique, and twists no one sees coming. Just like this one, where the bully provokes the newcomer without knowing he's facing a kung fu master. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and which moment surprised you the most. It helps this video reach more people. And share this story with someone who's going to love it. I'll see you in the next chapter.